Okay, hi, it's me, Karen Q, also known as Mrs. Q or Karen Quinones, and I'm glad you're here to join me today for 300 blocks, 300 years of architectural history within 5 blocks. And I'm using a gimbal for the first time today, and I'm also using some different streaming software than usual, so I hope you're all able to see this. And as you learn about history, I'm going to be learning a little bit more about live streaming. So I hope you'll be patient with me. And we've got a big loud truck going by, so give me a second. I'm also going to wait a couple of moments for some more people to join us, so hold on. Okay. So I'm just going to wait for this truck to go by. So here we are. So when I decided to do this today, I haven't been out doing tours for a while, as many of you know. I set sort of a goal for myself, and that is to be able to teach you 300 years of New York City history by looking at the architecture within 5 city blocks of Fraunces Tavern. And I'm pretty sure I can do it. I'm pretty sure this will work out. I haven't put together a route yet that I'm going to follow, so we're going to kind of wander around, and I'm going to try to do this as chronologically as possible. So that's another challenge we have, because you might know everything is all smashed together here in Lower Manhattan. So those of you who are watching as you come on, if you'd like to say hi to me and let me know where you are, that would be fantastic. And so as you see, we're looking at Fraunces Tavern here. And if you want to follow along on a map, if you go to Google Maps and you look for Broad and Pearl Streets, NYC, you'll be pointed right to where I'm sitting right here at Broad Street and Pearl Street at Fraunces Tavern. Now the border I'm going to keep to today, the northern border will be Wall Street, and that will keep us in the old original village of New Amsterdam, as originally settled by the Dutch. So I'm going to try to stay within that border and show you 300 years of New York City history. And as we look at the architectural changes over time, I think you're going to be really fascinated, because they really do show us how New York City changed and developed during that time, both by use of materials, building design, the influence for the building design, and also the engineering as we get up to the Skyscraper Wars. And of course, if we're going to talk about the oldest architecture in New York, we have to start with Fraunces Tavern right in front of us, built in 1719. So that means technically I have to, by the end of the tour, find a building built as late as 2019 within the boundaries of Pearl Street and Wall Street from Broadway to the East River. Do you guys think I can do it? Let's see if I can. I'm going to pick up my bag here. And pick up my bag, and let's get closer to Fraunces Tavern. And if this wobbles a lot, I apologize. I'm getting used to using this gimbal. I've never used it before, so give me a few minutes to get used to it. So we want to walk over to Fraunces Tavern, where it seems I've been spending a whole lot of my time lately. And we're going to walk over to Fraunces Tavern. So this is the corner of Broad and Pearl Street. Now from here out is landfill. So Pearl Street, the street I'm crossing right now, and that way Pearl Street leads us over to Bowling Green, and in that direction Pearl Street leads us up the east side of the island, and that's the direction we're going to be going in. This direction, Broad Street, leads us out to the harbor, to New York City Harbor, and originally the shore of the island was right here where we're standing at Pearl Street, and this is looking north up Broad Street to Wall Street. So Fraunces Tavern technically was built on landfill. So by 1719 there was already landfill here in the city of New York, and that went out to the next block, Water Street, where you're seeing the bus go by. And then a few blocks beyond that is the newer shore, which came in the early 1800s. So let's take a look at Fraunces Tavern and see what we can learn about it. It was built in 1719, so that's the Colonial era, or the Georgian era, we might want to call it. And we see a couple of different types of bricks. We see some windows, and we see a double column entryway and a balustrade above it. And up on the top, there's a mansard roof we can't see at this angle, and another balustrade. So this is an illustration of that colonial architecture, or what we call Georgian period architecture, built during the eras of the reigns of the Kings George. This is the oldest intact building we are going to see today, and it was built as a residence, and very nice residence, wasn't it? It was built by a family called the Delancey family. And if that name sounds familiar to you, you might know Delancey Street on the Lower East Side. That was the Delancey farm. They owned quite a lot of land up there, and the street is still named for their old farm. The Delanceys, by the way, are going to go on to be loyalists during the American Revolution. Now, they were an extremely wealthy family, and when they built their home, they displayed that wealth in the way they built their home. First, the opulent Georgian architecture, the balustrade, the columns, and the type of brick. The yellow brick you see on the base and on the Broad Street side is Holland brick, and it was the most expensive brick you could buy at that time. So when the Delanceys built their home, it was a very expensive Georgian mansion that looked right out onto the harbor. Well, wouldn't you know, shortly after the Delanceys built this building, the East River began getting developed commercially, and the neighborhood became commercial, and the Delanceys sold the building. They sold it to a man named Sam Fraunces, and today the tavern is named for him, as you can see there, Fraunces Tavern. And Sam Fraunces is the gentleman who's going to own it during and after the American Revolution. For you guys who are fans of the Hamilton musical, that big scene in the tavern with Hamilton, Lafayette, Hercules Mulligan, and John Lawrence is depicted as having taken place here when it was the Queen's Head Tavern. And the Queen's Head Tavern was a regular meeting place for the New York Sons of Liberty. So this becomes an inn and a tavern. The only other surviving Georgian structure in Lower Manhattan is St. Paul's Chapel, and we are not going to see St. Paul's Chapel today. That's beyond our Wall Street barrier. So this would have been early 1700s, and we're going to go back across the street so we can have a better look at this block. And if you have any questions, please be sure to put them in the comments so that I can see them. So let's take a look from over here. So over here we have a better look of Fraunces Tavern. Now comes our challenge to find buildings for our next period, because in 1776, everything to the west of Fraunces Tavern burned in a fire. So you can see everything there is quite new. And in 1835, everything east of Fraunces Tavern also burned in a fire. So as far as finding anything as old as Fraunces Tavern today, we are not. This is the oldest intact structure that we're going to see. And you can see that nice mansard roof and balustrade up on the top. Fraunces Tavern, by the way, has a wonderful museum. I just did 2 videos on my recent visit to the museum if you want to check them out. So these buildings we see next to Fraunces Tavern, we can also see look very different. They're a later era. They're about 100 years later. So we're now in 1800, and they are much taller, and they are made of a more modern type of brick. So we walk along here on Pearl Street. So these were all later 1800s structures. We do have something here, though, that isn't fully intact, but is actually older than Fraunces Tavern. We're going to come up to it in a moment, and it is the oldest thing. And if I wanted to cheat, I might base our 300-year time period on this building, because it would make it easier for me to find a building 300 years older than it. But I'm not. I'll use Fraunces Tavern as 1719 and try to find a building as late as 2019. And right over here, the building I'm walking by was built in the 1970s. It's an office building, and I think it's kind of ugly myself. But when they built this building, they were required to preserve anything they found that was architecturally significant. And if we look down here, I hope there's not too much glare on it. If we look down here, you can see the foundation of an old building. And this building is from the 1690s. This was Governor Lovelace Tavern. So a tavern building from the 1690s. And if we look over here at Pearl Street, It was right on the shore of the island. So Pearl Street ran right there where that white truck is going by, and you can imagine you might have been in Lovelace Tavern looking right out onto New York Harbor in the 1690s. So this is the oldest thing we're going to see today, this foundation from the 1690s. Very beautiful. And let's continue our walk. So let's just walk over here across the street, because when I do my Revolutionary War tour, there's a spot where I like to stop people so that they can take pictures. And if some of you have been on that tour, you might remember that I stopped you in this little plaza so that you could take pictures as well. And I'm going to turn around in a moment and you'll see what I mean. And there we are. There is the skyline here. And technically from right here, you are seeing 300 years of architectural history. So if I wanted to cheat, I could stop right here and say, okay guys, I've shown you everything and we're all done for today, but I'm not going to do that. So let's head up through this little historic district. Now, I mentioned that everything through here burned in a fire in 1835. So the buildings we're going to be passing were built after that fire. Some of you might know this. This is called Historic Stone Street. That's Pearl Street there. And we're coming up here and we're going to walk along Stone Street. And here again is that office building that was built in the 1970s. Something I'm not going to talk too much about today. We have better examples of 20th century architecture to look at today than that monstrosity. So look at this. You see this beautiful old historic district landmarked from the 1800s. And we're going to take a better look at some of these buildings. All of these buildings are landmarked. The entire district is Stone Street. Now, Stone Street is thought to have been the first paved street in New York, running from what was then the dock at New Amsterdam up to Fort Amsterdam, which is where the Bowling Green is today. And you can see today this is a little historic district with lots of restaurants, taverns, and things out here. And cobblestones. So we have some original cobblestones. And you can see the buildings through here, all looking really, really beautiful. So a really nice look at old New York as we go through here. And I'm going to try to enlarge some of these buildings for you. Now, originally these buildings would have been the type of commercial buildings you would have seen in 1830s New York. So you might see some sort of artisan or store in the ground floor, and then offices up above. So this is the early commercial district here in New York City, and part of the reasons, of course, the Delanceys moved their home further north to more sought-after architecture. These buildings are all brick, so you can see as we move forward in time we have brick. Before the fire of 1835, most of these dwellings were wood. So after those repeated fires, the city began moving to brick. And of course, as the city became more commercial and wealthier, brick was more affordable. So we have these brick dwellings, these brick commercial buildings along Pearl Street that are all little restaurants and taverns and things today. And again, I'll show you those cobblestones. And I'm not going to walk on Stone Street because it's a little congested, or you know what, maybe I will. Let's take a quick walk up Stone Street, because the next building we want to talk to is right at the end of Stone Street. And I bet some of you have maybe frequented some of the restaurants along here. Okay. You can see people are out having a nice afternoon, enjoying the beautiful day. So we might imagine walking through here and you might see some blacksmiths in here. You might see some shipping supply stores. You might see some importers through here, maybe some exporters, and all kinds of industry you would think of as being important to New York in the 1830s as we were growing and becoming a commercial center. Along to the right of us is the East River, and those docks on the East River at that time were extremely important to the city's commerce. The Hudson River wasn't developed as a dock area until much later. So here we are, beautiful Stone Street, and I want to show you specifically something on a building. And I'll take a look up there and see if you can see those stars at the ends of the windows, those star finials. Those star finials anchor the iron rods that are part of the brick structure of the building that hold it together. And those star finials are landmarked as well as the buildings themselves. And so now we're coming out of Stone Street. It's quite noisy here. I apologize for that. And the next building we want to look at, which is going to take us to the 1850s, is right here on the corner. It's called India House. Here we go, quite beautiful. So we're at India House and Hanover Square. And I'm going to try to get across the street so that you can get a nicer look at India House. As New York developed commercially, you start to see the buildings become much more complex and more beautiful and ornate. And India House really is one of those first important commercial structures in the city's history. And here it is. There's always trucks in front of it, unfortunately. I'm going to try to get over here where I can see better and you can see better. So here we have India House. India House was originally built by the Hanover Banking Company. This was originally a commercial structure of bank built of brownstone in the Anglo-Italian style. And today it's considered one of those early important commercial structures in the growth of New York City. And you can see that it really is a pattern, kind of shows you what those famous brownstones in New York City are going to look like in the future. And it really is kind of a pattern for those brownstones. But as for this building, it was originally built as a commercial building. Now, the East River is over here and the docks began to develop along here. So, of course, this area became more and more commercial over time. And we have a beautiful landmark right around here, around the corner from India House. I mentioned this is Hanover Square. If you're a fan of Mrs. Q Live, if you watch me on Fridays as Mrs. Q lives in 18th century Hanover Square because all of the merchants and importers and business people were here in Hanover Square. So this would have been where Mrs. Q lives in the 18th century or the 1700s. And we're going to walk over here and there's a new building here I don't want you to see yet, so I'm going to aim my camera down at the ugly floor, but only because I want to try to stay in the time period. So I don't really want to get out of the 1800s yet. I want to keep us in the 1800s before we move into the 20th century. So I apologize if looking at the sidewalk is a little boring, but you know, I do have a reason for doing that. I don't want your vision of our architectural design to be tainted by the modern architecture yet. I just want you to be enjoying the beautiful 18th century. I should say 19th century. So our next landmark is Delmonico's. Delmonico's is incredibly beautiful. It's the beginning of the era of Beaux-Arts, elaborate structure, sculpture, and design. And in the case of Delmonico's, the base is brownstone and the top is brick and terracotta. You see this beautiful brick and terracotta design throughout the top of the building. I'm going to aim up there so you can see it a little bit better. All of that beautiful work. Now, some of the Beaux-Arts buildings, or most of them that we see down here, are made of limestone and granite and other more expensive materials. So the brownstone and terracotta and brick is a little bit less expensive of a building material, and it's also a little bit lighter of a building material. And down here in Lower Manhattan, you'll see a lot of these buildings with the brownstone base and the brick and terracotta designs on the top. And this is quite beautiful. We're also today going to see quite a lot of buildings with this unusual shape because we are in a historic district and no one can develop outside of the structure of these streets. So all of these buildings we're going to be looking at have these strange shapes in order to keep with the design of the streets as they were originally laid out in our colonial era. So beautiful Delmonico's, they have been here since 1824, and they are the oldest continental style restaurant in America. So let's walk around a little bit more and see what we can see. We have a beautiful skyscraper here that I'm going to get back to because it's a 20th century skyscraper, and I want to continue staying in the 1800s with New York's commercial development. So I think most of you know that New York developed commercially and became a shipping, a commercial center, and a financial center. So some of the first development we're going to see is going to happen up on Wall Street, and the buildings are going to be commercial or banking buildings. And today we're going to see a lot of financial institutions. Now, all of that money in New York was coming from sea trade, shipping, right? So when we think about shipping, a lot of these buildings are also going to have on them emblems and designs about being at sea. So we're going to see sea creatures and ships and all kinds of things. We're going to see lots of coins and symbols of money, and we're going to see lots of, when we get to the 20th century, these big skyscrapers down here, all stuck in right next together, one after the other, when the skyscrapers begin rising into the sky in the 1920s. So here we see some really pretty lamps in the back of a building, and this is the next building we're going to look at. Originally called the Merchants Exchange or the Mercantile Exchange. And this building, look at how big it is. It goes all the way to the next block in that direction. And from here, it goes all the way up to Wall Street. It takes up an entire city block, and it was built in I think it was completed in 1841, and it took about 6 years to build. And all of these blocks we're passing by are syenite, a type of bluish colored granite blocks. So there are hundreds and hundreds of these blocks that make up this building. And this was built as an exchange, a trading exchange for merchants, or what we might call today a mercantile exchange. And let's get up here to the front of the building because it really is magnificent. It's a 55 wall. Some of you are probably going to recognize it when you see it. And here we go. Around here, now we're looking down Wall Street, and this is the building we want to talk about next. I'm going to cross the street to do this because it's so big I can't stand on the same side of the street and talk about it. Well, here we go. You notice 55 Wall Street. I think I'll stop here right opposite the entrance and take a look at this. Let's look up and check this out. The beautiful columns. I'm not going to show you the second floor yet because the original building is only the bottom floor, completed in 1840s, I think 1841. All of those columns, if you take a look at those columns, you notice there are no connecting joints in those columns. If they're not segmented, those are entire columns built at the quarry in New England and shipped here to New York and assembled on the building. The same with those massive squares. And to give you an idea how big those squares are, there's the doorman, and look at how small he looks next to those blocks. And we can see some people up on the balcony. So as New York became a commercial powerhouse in the mid-1800s, we started building buildings that looked like Europe. So we're going to see a bunch of these neo-Greek style buildings in homage to Europe and European trade and European power, as a sign that New York is now on a commercial level competing with the great nations of Europe. And this is one of those buildings that show us that. Now this building's pretty plain, and we don't see a lot of sculpture on it or anything. We have those very plain Greek columns. So let's walk down here a little bit and see what happens in the future. So in the mid-1800s, New York is growing and becoming the commercial center of the New World, or I should say the new commercial center of the world. And Wall Street is just going to be full of banks, trading companies, insurance companies, and financial companies. And we're going to start seeing buildings like this with coins on the outside. And this building was originally built by a company called Brown Brothers Harriman. Some of you might remember them. Oh, and you can see on the doorway, it actually still says Brown Brothers on the doorway. And you can see the Greek and Roman coins along the side of the building. And this building is going to be early 1900s. But I want to come down here because before we get to the banking buildings, we still have the buildings that are celebrating commerce and trade and seafaring. So we have some buildings down here with beautiful sculptures commemorating our history and maritime trade. And if you're looking across there, that's Brooklyn Heights across there. So I'm walking downhill on Wall Street. I'm walking toward the East River. And over here, we're starting to see something with some really pretty elements on it, aren't we? So let me stop right about here. And this is the old Munson Steamship Building. This was built around 1920. And we notice here these emblems of shipping on it. There's the Munson Steamship emblem in the middle, and you see two tridents to either side of it and two crests with tridents as well. And you see this repeated around the building. Let me go up a level. How far up am I going? There I am. So, and there you can see an anchor and a wheel and a caduceus up on the top. And today we usually think of that caduceus as being associated with medicine. But at that time, it was a symbol of trade and commerce. So the symbols on this building tell us trade and commerce, and a ship and an anchor, a wheel and an anchor. So seafaring, commerce, or trade. And look at this. The front of a ship with a beautiful American eagle mounted on it, representing the front of the ship. So some beautiful, beautiful work on this building. And for years I looked at this building and never realized there were owls on it as well. So there's an owl sitting on top of what is meant to be a column, and a triangular balustrade over the door, a triangular pediment over the door. And then we have a pretty plain face up to a very ornate top. Now, it was very expensive to do all of this work on these buildings, so we'll see that many of these buildings are very fashionable or ornate on the ground level where people see them, and they're very ornate again up on the top where you see them on the skyline. And in between, they can just sometimes be plain brick or some other plain stone, because it's just too expensive to do the building from the ground all the way up to the top. And if I can get past this truck, you can also see the lamps with the tridents on them on either side of the main entrance. And the company logo, again, up at the top. So this is the Munson Steamship Company. Obviously, steamships are very important. Steamships in the early 1800s changed global trade and travel, right? Because now you can go much further, you can carry a much heavier load than you could with a sailing ship. So the invention of the steamship in New York by Robert Fulton really is going to help catapult New York to the front of global trade and travel. And also around that time, we're going to get something called the Erie Canal, which will connect the Port of New York with the Great Lakes shipping system. And I'm going to cross the street here again because we want to look at the building that's right behind me. And because these streets are so small, we often can't be on the same side of the street as the building we want to look at. So let's look at this. The old Siemens Bank, also known as the Williamsburg Bank. And we have all of this beautiful symbols of shipping all around the building. Look at that, all carved by hand in stone. Remember, all of this early carving is done by hand. It's not machine made yet, so we're still looking at buildings where the outside decoration is sculpted. And you can see the ship up there, and if I go up another level, you can see some more medallions with all kinds of sea creatures on them. Very, very beautiful building. And again, the middle of the building is quite plain. And then if we were able to see the top, you would see the top is quite ornate again. So the old Siemens Bank. So that tells you what the bank was. It was a bank for sailors and seamen, the Siemens Savings Bank, for them to save and invest their money. And so all of the symbols of the sea are all around on this bank. Some of you might also catch that we're right at the intersection of Wall and Pearl Street, where there used to be a wall here and an arch right there at Pearl Street in that old wooden wall. And this arch also reproduces that old wall and arch from Old New Amsterdam. So a nice look at this. Now, let's see, we have some other buildings here. What do we want to look at next that could be really interesting? Oh, let's take a look at this. So this is the 1800s. I want to make sure I'm not lost. Oh, I know what I want to show you next. We're going to walk back up Wall Street, because once we get into the 1900s and we get to 1917, 1918, and 1920, we begin the Skyscraper Wars, where everybody is building higher and higher, and everybody seeks to build the tallest building in the world. And now we're going to see what happens then. So one of the first buildings in this area, you know what? I missed something I wanted to show you. bear with me. I'm going to go back this way to get to that building because there's something spectacular I wanted to show you. So here's a close-up of the Munson Steamship Company as we walk underneath it. You can see it has some very pretty stained glass up there too. And those symbols of shipping. So let's just go around this way. I almost forgot this building was here, and many of you are going to recognize it and want to know more about it. I'm going to come around the corner here at Pearl and Beaver Street, and let's take a look at this, because if some of you, and I bet some of you are John Wick fans, you might recognize this as the entrance to the hotel in the John Wick movies. And this really is not a hotel at all. It is the old Beaver Building, as it's called. And I want to show it to you from across the street so you can get an idea of how beautiful it is. So this is another one of those buildings that is built in an odd shape because it has to accommodate the site upon which it was built. And one of the first things we see when we look up there is we see these crests with beaver heads all the way around the building, around the entire building. These giant beaver heads looking down on us. And the street we're on is Bieber Street. The significance of the beavers: the beaver pelts were highly sought after fur during the early Dutch and early English eras, and as a result, the beaver trade made New York extremely wealthy. So we have Bieber Street, and we have the beaver emblems on these crests. This is also known as the Cocoa Exchange. Later it became the Cocoa Exchange. I think this was built in the 1890s. If we look all the way up at the top, which is hard for you to see because of the glare of the sun, all around the top there's beautiful red and green terracotta. And this is the first building in New York to use that glazed colored terracotta, to move away from just the plain red terracotta to the green and red glazed terracotta. So now we're in the 1890s, and we can see the buildings are becoming more ornate. They're using limestone and granite as well as colored terracotta, and we're seeing these beautiful sculptures that are going to be a part of that Beaux-Arts era. And if you've been to the New York Public Library, the New York Public Library is also a Beaux-Arts era building, and those buildings are characterized by lots of ornate sculpture on the outside of the buildings. If you've been to the Charging Bull and the Alexander Hamilton Customs House, that is also a famous Beaux-Arts building here in New York City, but we have many of them. Delmonico's, which you can see in the foreground or in the background there, is also considered a Beaux-Arts building. I wanted to walk this way because I wanted to show you the original entrance. Now, I talked about on my right is the Munson Steamship Company. This was their original building before it was the Cocoa Exchange. You can see the Munson Line Building Company. And up on the top, above that, what do you see? Two giant beavers on each side of the crest. So again, paying tribute to the wealth of the beaver trade and the wealth that that brought to the city of New York. A couple more beavers. There have been people who have mistaken these beavers for rats and think of this as the rat building, but they're not rats. Now, the next building I want to talk to you about is 20 Exchange Place. We're just coming up on it now. And it is the first skyscraper in Lower Manhattan, the first official skyscraper or building that was meant to be a skyscraper. At that time, it's the early 1900s. I think this is the end of the 1920s. The tallest building in the world at that time was the Woolworth Building, which is up by City Hall, built in 1913. And so now people got together and decided they wanted to build a taller building than the Woolworth Building, the tallest building in the world. And that would have been this building, 20 Exchange Place. If any of you are big Clive Owen fans, Denzel Washington, or Jodie Foster fans, you might know that they all three appeared in a film that took place supposedly in this building. It was called Inside Man, and that was shot all around this building. Now, this building was built as something called the Farmers Loan and Trust Company, and I do want to take you around to a different part of the building so that you can see the emblems on it. Now, it really is a bunch of different architectural styles. We have some classicism here, but mostly symbols of farming. So let's take a look. So here we have some wheat tied together, And over here we have some reeds tied together and some old Greek symbols of farming. Up above it, since it was a bank, the Farmers Loan and Trust, we have coins going all around it. And we also have a sort of Art Deco version of corn stalks right there. So let's see, these are the coins on the building. I want to take you around to one of these doors because one of the doors on this building has been restored and it's quite magnificent. This is the main entrance. Let's take a look at the entrance arch. So this building officially was completed in 1931. And take a look at this, quite beautiful inside and out. If I can get this balanced. There's the inside, there's the entry arch, all covered with coins, and on each side of the arch are symbols of the Farmers Loan and Trust Company. And all sorts of coins. And also in the arch you see again symbols of plants and trees adorning the arch. And some lovely Art Deco inside of the building. The lobby of this building is landmarked separately from the outside and is considered one of the finest Art Deco lobbies in America. It's quite beautiful to see. It is an apartment building now. Give me a minute. I want to see if we can look up. If we look straight up, see if you can see them. Whoa, do you see some heads looking down at us? We have some heads looking down at us. Let me find them. There they are. Oh, sorry about that. Having a little trouble controlling this. You see some heads looking down at us. And those heads are the titans of finance. There are 14 of those around this building, and they are smiling and frowning, representing the booms and busts of the financial period. Construction of this building was delayed for a time because of the crash of 1929. So those guys up there, those soldiers smiling and frowning, are representative of the instability of the financial markets. And here you can see some beautiful ironwork here on this building as well. And I want to come around and show you the doors on this side because they are spectacular. Now the doors are made of a type of nickel that they call nickel silver, and it's a white colored nickel. And most of it is all tarnished and ugly looking, but a couple of the doors have been restored. Well, this is not one of them. These are in kind of bad shape, but let's just take a look at the elements pictured on the entrance because this also tells us what the building is all about. So in the middle we have the doorway, and if I get a little closer, you can see that these are all traditional forms of transportation. We have steam engines, the old sailing boat, a couple hot air balloons, and then over the door we have a woman with a cornucopia, which represents wealth and prosperity, and we have a woman with a lock and a key, so a bank, and a couple of eagles, or owls I should say, and all above the arch, again, those symbols of farming. So we have prosperity, security, and farming, a bank for farmers. Very, very, very nicely done. One of the doors is partially restored, and I don't want to walk around the whole door, trying to find the whole building, trying to find the door. Behind us again is the back of what was the Mercantile Exchange, or the Merchants Exchange on Wall Street that I showed you. Now, I think it's sometime in the 1930s, the First National City Bank, also called Citibank, bought both of these buildings. They put the second floor on this building, and at one time, right where I'm pointing the camera, was a walkway connecting those two buildings. So this all once belonged to what we today call Citibank, or the First National City Bank. And Citibank doesn't own either of these buildings anymore, and they and of course the walkway is gone. Now, as far as 20 Exchange Place, it was, for a time, it may still be the tallest stone-faced building in America, but it never was tall enough to be the tallest building in the world. But we do have a building coming up on Wall Street that was the tallest building in the world, at least for a month, in 1929. And we'll talk about that. We'll be talking about that next. And there it is. Let me see if I can find it for you there. There it is, way up there with the green top on it. That is also called 40 Wall Street. But before I get to 40 Wall Street, we're going to walk up to Wall Street, and I'm going to tell you, we're going to talk about so we're going to walk up to Wall Street, and we're going to talk about a personal rivalry that became a banking rivalry that became the most famous duel in American history. And I bet some of you know exactly which two New York gentlemen I'm talking about. So we're up here to Wall Street, and I encourage you to come down to Wall Street area sometime. Just take your time, look up at the buildings, and enjoy all of the beautiful artwork that you can find on these buildings. It really is spectacular, built during a time when architecture was considered a major art form for Americans. And I'm going to back up here. So now we're up to the 1920s, as I mentioned, a little bit before the Farmers Loan and Trust. And I'm going to try to figure out how to make this even for you. And we have the Bank of New York. Bank of New York is the oldest bank still practicing in America. Under its original name, it was formed just near here in 1784 by, you know, Alexander Hamilton and a number of other wealthy gentlemen, one of them being Robert Morris and another Alexander McDougall. Bank of New York built this building in 1926. It is landmarked, and so the Bank of New York name stays on it, although they no longer own it. And it really is a really beautiful building with a Federalist era top on it. So very beautiful. You see the blue sky behind it, and there also is a beautiful eagle up there too. So the Bank of New York. Well, you guys all know who the big rival was to Alexander Hamilton, right? Mr. Aaron Burr. And Mr. Aaron Burr was on the board of directors of a bank as well. It was called the Manhattan Company, or the Manhattan Trust Company. And in 1929, they built the building you see there in the middle of the shot. And I'm going to go up, 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 up and show it to you. I think I have to back up to show it to you. And that building was the tallest building in the world in 1929. I don't think I can get it in this picture, I'm too close. For 1 month, until the Chrysler Building was finished. So 40 Wall, 1929, the tallest building in the world for about a month. Now the architects building the Chrysler Building and 40 Wall had been former partners, and they were each trying really hard to build the tallest building in the world. And they built their buildings 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 1 year, and kept the plans under lock and key, under guards in safes, so each wouldn't know what the other was doing. Well, eventually the architects here of 40 Wall heard that the other guys at the Chrysler Building were going to have a taller building, so they went to the City Planning Commission and asked to make their building taller. And at that time they put a top on it that looks like a big giant lantern, and you can see that on the skyline. Well, they were all happy, and 40 Wall opened, and they were the tallest building in the world. But what they and no one else knew was that the guys building the Chrysler Building had built that spire secretly inside of the building. One night they got out the spire, they mounted it on the Chrysler Building, and the Chrysler Building now became the tallest building in the world. And it stayed the tallest building until the Woolworth Building was opened. So you can see these are all banks here. The Manhattan Trust Company, which later became Chase Manhattan, the Bank of New York, which is still Bank of New York, and here we have Deutsche Bank, a newer building, built in the 1970s. Now, I do want to show you Deutsche Bank because it has an unusual lobby, and behind it is a building that is so magnificent, even though it's technically a block north of Pine Street, we're a block north of Wall Street at Pine Street, we are still going to go see it because you will be amazed when you see how ornate and beautiful this building is. And then we're going to come back out and we're going to head up to Trinity Church, where we find one of the oldest and one of the newest structures in Lower Manhattan. And I'm just going to stop here because there's a car pulling out. Oh, it looks like the lobby is now closed. This building has a really unique looking lobby, and it looks like that to see the building I want to show you, I'm going to have to go around the block. So let's go up Wall Street. You have to please forgive me as it's been a while since I've been down here, but while we're here, let's take another look at the gorgeous 55 wall Merchants Exchange 1841. Truly magnificent building, demonstrating to the world in the 1840s that New York is open for business. We are wealthy, we are powerful, we are capable, and we are ready to compete on an international scale in trade, finance, and commerce. So here it is, the beautiful old Merchants Exchange. This is the second oldest building on Wall Street, and some of you might know that the oldest building is Federal Hall National Memorial, built around the same time but opened just a little bit earlier. And while we're going by, I'll show you the plaque for the Bank of New York. So there's the old Bank of New York sign. And we have an entrance to the subway. There's so much to see just here on Wall Street that it's really quite remarkable. How about if I show you this, and you'll get a better look at 40 Wall Street, which I was talking about. So there is the top of 40 Wall. Remember, I mentioned that when they thought the Chrysler Building was going to be taller, they put a structure on the top that looked like a lantern, and in this picture you can see it up there. And that lantern is still lit every night. You can see it on the skyline. So that is the top of 40 Wall, tallest building in the world for a brief period in 1929. And over here we have some landmark buildings, signs you might like to see. Here we have the original cornerstone of the Bank of New York, built in 1797. And down here we have the official landmark building for the Bank of New York. So this building is landmarked for all future use. And we are going to come up here on Wall Street in a minute, and we're going to talk about that big building up there, One Wall. We'll talk about the New York Stock Exchange. We'll talk about the Morgan Bank building. But first, we're going to go around, and excuse me for this detour, but I didn't know the shortcut was closed, because we are going to see something on Pine Street that is truly a magnificent showing of American architecture of the 1930s. Something that's just stupendous. And you can see that even just the regular buildings that I'm passing here have this beautiful ironwork on them, very ornate and beautiful ironwork. Even on some of the buildings, you know, that are not landmarked. Sorry about that. I'm not using a wireless microphone, I'm using my headphone, and I just accidentally grabbed the cable. Here we go. This is the old Chase Manhattan Plaza. And you can see that's all modern 20th century architecture, and we're not really up to looking at that yet. What we want to do is come around here. This is Pine Street. This is the street north of Wall Street. And right over here is a landmarked Catholic church, Our Lady of Victory. So this is an old little landmark church here. But that is not what we want to look at. We want to look at some stuff over here that is just incredible. Stuff that's so easy to miss because Pine Street is such a little street, and it's to the north of Wall Street, so most people don't even bother to walk on it because everybody really wants to just see Wall Street. Nobody wants to look at Pine Street, but you're probably starting to see some pretty spectacular looking stuff as we pass by here. And we are going to jump back in time a little bit, again to the 1800s, the 1880s to be specific, to see this incredible. See if I can get in here, and you can see it, this incredible apartment building. So here we have an early New York City apartment building built in the 1880s. I'm going to look up there and look at that stone and terracotta work on this building. It is magnificent, and I'm going to enlarge this a little bit so that you can see how ornate that work is on the front of the building. The black sections are iron. And, oh, excuse me, I'm really having some trouble figuring out how to use this gimbal. There we go. The black sections are iron, and the red sections are the terracotta. And this ornateness goes all the way up to the top of the building, all the way up the face. So we can see that this building was quite expensive to build. And I'm going to back up a little bit here, see if we can see this better. Whoa, look at that, all the way up to the top of the building. we see that beautiful work that goes all the way up. On the ground floor, it's blocked by this scaffolding are some beautiful, I think, Druid sculpture of snakes and the item you might recognize from Britain called a green man, a symbol of fertility. But we can't really see that, and there are these massive snakes bordering the entranceway. So this would have been an apartment building in the 1880s, and I forgot the architect's name, but the architect, I'm sorry to say, became famous for committing suicide by jumping out of his apartment in Midtown. So obviously he had some problems. I just want you to see that a little bit better, how beautiful the work on that building is. Really incredible workmanship. Remember, this is all hand carved, this brick and this terracotta, and the iron is all hand poured. I'm not sure how they made the iron. I don't know if it's hand hammered or how it was made. Something I don't know. I'm not an architect. Next to it is the old Downtown Association. The Downtown Association is the oldest private club in Lower Manhattan. And they have a pretty simple Romanesque design. Also built out of the brownstone that was popular in the 1800s. So this is the Downtown Association, kind of a Romanesque design. Very pretty. And the building I want to show you is coming up right here. It's amazing that we find a plain 1840s Romanesque structure next to what I think is the wildest Art Deco structure in Lower Manhattan, the old City Services Building. And I'm going to back up into this nook here behind Deutsche Bank in the hopes that you can see some of this. We're just getting near the building, and already you can start to see this incredible Art Deco aluminum design around the building. I'm going to enlarge that for you to see. This is all incredible aluminum work around this building, and over all of the entrances, these stunning, there they are, sunflower lights. Really beautiful. When this building was owned by AIG, American International, they used to allow me to bring my tours into the lobby and give a tour of the Art Deco beauty of the lobby, but it's now a private residence, and of course we can't do that anymore. This is unashamedly Art Deco, and if we go up we can see some stonework, some flowers, and I don't know if I'm even going to be able to show you the top of this building from this close, but I do want to show you the main entrance because it is outstanding. And as we get close to it, you can already see in the middle of the frame that the entrance has a scale model of the building right at the entrance. So a stone scale model of the building right at the entrance of the building to attest to its magnificence. The City Services Building also was built in the 1930s, and it was city services. It provided things like water, steam, and electricity to the city of New York. And this was a private building at those times. Those things were not government run, so this was a private industry that did this. And this is the, see if I can line myself up, the main entrance, and you can see that incredible statue of the building itself, and over it the triangular emblem, which was the emblem of the City Services Building, showing that they supplied 3 of the city's needs. And you can see some more of those. I think those are supposed to be corn plants that you're seeing in that aluminum sculpture, and more of these beautiful, beautiful aluminum sunflowers. And right in the middle of the frame, those are lights. Those vertical objects are lights. So those light up at night. The bottom is some type of granite. It's a rose granite. I forgot where it's from. And I mentioned earlier in the tour that to build down here, you have to stay with the topography of the area, right? So you can't change a street, you can't level a street, you can't change the direction of anything. So check this out. This end of the building is the first floor. And as we come along Pine Street, that becomes the second floor, because Pine Street goes downhill toward the East River. So that first floor becomes the second floor, and we have a bigger ground floor. The interior of this building, I believe, is rated as the most beautiful Art Deco interior in America. I have a book about Art Deco, and it talks all about this. Now, Art Deco was a uniquely American architectural style, right? Originated in America. America didn't have any architectural schools in the beginning of the 20th century. All of our architects were educated in Europe. And so they took these European designs that they learned, the Beaux-Arts that we saw with all of the artwork on the outside of the building, and they wanted to translate that into the modern age, or the age of machinery. So now you see that the artwork, oh, I didn't mean to reverse it. Hi, that's me. And let me put that back. That's me standing against a wall to try to give you a good view. Here we go. So what they did was they wanted to keep the artwork on the outside of the building, but now the artwork it's machine made. So all of these aluminum panels are machine pressed. And of course, as you can imagine, in some circles of architectural critics, they were outraged by the idea that art could be machine made. But that was part of the idea of the Art Deco movement, that it was meant to show that art now could also be manufactured by machine, and welcoming in the Industrial Revolution and the age of machines. So that is the entrance to the old City Services building. And I really love, look at this, I love this scale model over the door. Look at this, it's really, really neat. When we get a little further away, I'll show you the top of this building. We can't see it from here because it's just way, way, way too tall, but I'll show you the top of it when we get a little further away. We're gonna walk back up Wall Street. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I don't see any comments, and I'm afraid that that's the software I'm using, that I can't see your comments. So if you're asking me anything or commenting, I'm truly sorry that I haven't answered your questions, but I will go back later and look to see if you left any, and I will answer those comments for you later. Let me just have a look at the beautiful Art Deco on this building. Just really stunning. We have the granite, we have the limestone, aluminum, all of these beautiful materials brought together. And if you can see in there, you can see, let me see if we can sneak a little bit of a look at the beautiful ceiling lights in there. The walls inside are also, they're stone, but they're wood, but they look like stone. Quite magnificent. And here we are back at the Downtown Association. And maybe we could see the top of that apartment building a little bit better. There it is up there. That apartment building I was telling you about earlier. You can see the top of it a little better up there. That would have been a very tall apartment building at 12 stories when it was built in the 1880s. Oh, here we go, some questions. When was the Woodworth Building was built? It finished in 1913, and it was the tallest building in the world for 16 years until 1929. Let's see. Oh, thank you. Oh, you took my tour. Thank you so much for coming on my tour and enjoying it. Thank you for enjoying this. The Woolworth Building was the tallest building in the world, built from 1911 to 1913, celebrated around the world when it opened, and it remained the tallest building in the world until 40 Wall Street opened in 1929, 16 years later. And of course, I mentioned that the Empire State Building replaced 40 Wall as the tallest building in the world. I'm really sorry I couldn't show you this lobby because it is some of the freakiest architecture I've ever seen in this lobby. It kind of looks like some sort of strange desert oasis. It's very strange. And here we have just another one of these buildings. These are all landmarked through here, and this is a pretty one too. If you look up here, you can see the emblems, the sun emblems on this building. This is another one of these pretty brick and terracotta buildings. Virtually everything we're walking by down here is landmarked. And by the way, one of the things I'm going to do later when I get back to my office is if you go to my Patreon page, Mrs. Q NYC, I'm going to post there the landmark reports of some of the buildings we're passing today. So you can read some of those landmark reports and see why these buildings are considered worthy of being landmarked by the New York City Landmark Preservation Commission. And you can see those without becoming a monthly patron, but it would be nice if you did. And if you're enjoying the tour, you can also support me with donations at PayPal. You can PayPal me at Patriot Tours, and you can also Venmo me at Patriot Tours NYC. And you can also, if you're going to be in New York, support me the best way. Come on one of my tours. And right there, look at that. There's a building that looks like a castle. What is that? A castle. That's the Federal Reserve, built in 1926. And that's a little bit north of our tour, but it's such a neat looking building, isn't it? And the Federal Reserve was built to look like a Medici fortress. And those are giant blocks of limestone that make up the Fed. So let me see if I can see that a little bit better. There you go, you can kind of see the top of the Federal Reserve. But now we're getting too far north because I promised I was going to do this within the boundaries of Wall Street. Let's see, are we far enough away that you can see the top of the City Services building yet? Let's walk over here a little bit. And I'm still on Pine Street, so I'm behind the building called 40 Wall now. Let's turn around and see. Whoa, let's see, can you see it? There it is, that spire up there, that is the top of the City Services building. And it's all sparkly up there because that is a huge glass, aluminum and steel observation room. It's a 360-degree observation room with an elevator that opens up through the floor of the middle of the observation deck. Truly magnificent building built in the 1930s. And what do we want to see next? Oh, let's go back over to Wall Street because we have to see Federal Hall, where I've also been spending a lot of my time lately. But Federal Hall is the oldest building on Wall Street, so we do have to go look at it. Uh-oh, would you like a preview of one of the new buildings? Here we go. And what do you think of that black and yellow building? So that building was completed around 2010. And that is an apartment building. And that was the building I didn't want to show you across the street from Delmonico's. So that is right across from Delmonico's. And you can let me know what you think of this black and yellow building. Mr. Q and I have a bit of a personal debate over that building. One of us thinks it's disgraceful and ugly, and one of us thinks it looks pretty ugly down here, but it looks pretty good if you're looking at it from Brooklyn. Oh, we'll also be able to see the top of 20 Exchange Place, the building I told you was the one where they did the movie Inside Man. So let's look up there. And that's the building on the left. That's 20 Exchange Place, the Farmers Loan and Trust Company. Oh, Dan Reed does not like that. Yeah, but Dan, Mr. Q and I also, in general, don't like that black and yellow building at all. And when you walk by it, it's pretty appalling. Let me show you here's a close-up of the entry to that building. That big black rounded area right there in the middle of the shot is the entrance to that black and yellow building. And that brick on the other side is beautiful, Delmonico's restaurant. And then you look up and you see the black and yellow building there. I, however, think it looks great if you're on the BQE looking toward the skyline. It's not much up close like this, but somehow that black and yellow pattern I find to be really appealing from the other side of the East River. And Mr. Q would loudly disagree with me on that matter. So here's a building I wasn't going to talk about, but you know what, as long as we're here, I will. And here we have a kiosk, and it's nice to see that a lot of people are out today. So here we have this Wall Street building, which was, for most of the years I worked on Wall Street, about 20 years, boarded up and abandoned. And about 15 years ago, Tiffany and Company bought it, and they fully restored it, and they did a beautiful, beautiful job. So there's the entrance. And just look at how beautiful they did this. Look at that gorgeous entrance there. It's got the Tiffany and Company name up on the top. And again, you see the caduceus on either side, right? That symbol we think of as being about medicine, but is really about commerce and trade. And this was a bank building at some time. Uh-oh, looks like people aren't a big fan of the black and yellow building. My initial reaction to the building was, who did the developers pay off and the local community board to get that thing approved in the midst of a historic district? But we'll get into, that's the sort of question I get into as my Mrs. Q character, the politics of New York. And here we have some of the beautiful stonework, the caduceus and a lion. Really, really beautiful. Or is that a ram? I'm sorry, I think it's a ram. Looks like it's a ram. Very beautiful work. And that is also a rather tall building. At this angle, I'm not going to be able to show you the height of the building, but I can show you how it looks on the ground, and that it's quite beautiful. And it is right opposite the entrance to 40 Wall. And as long as we're over here, here's the landmark marker for 40 Wall Street. And look at this, across the street now we're coming up on the Morgan Bank building, built by J.P. Morgan. Now, J.P. Morgan had another building here in the 1800s and the 1880s, and had it torn down the early 20th century because those old ornate buildings were becoming unpopular. So J.P. Morgan wanted a building that was more reflective of the early 20th century, limestone. And we even find some buildings here in Lower Manhattan, maybe I'll point some out for you one day, that were originally brick but now have a limestone facade over the original brick. And there's one very well-known building down here where they didn't do the limestone on every face, and on the rear of the building, facing a tiny narrow alleyway, you can see the old brick face of that building. So I'll show you that one another time. But here is the Morgan Bank building at the corner of Broad and Wall Street, and it looks like they're at last restoring this building. Some of you are probably thinking, well, it's the Morgan Bank building, so why isn't she standing over there by the holes in the wall? So I will walk over and show you the holes in the wall, and we'll talk about what they're all about. So of course, you know, J.P. Morgan was a powerhouse banker here in New York and financed some of the great inventors of the early 20th century, like Edison, Tesla, and others. And here we have some huge holes in the side of the building. And you'd think, well, why didn't they fix these holes? Well, they left the holes here on purpose, and that is because I think it was 1921, but someone correct me if I have the wrong year. A group of European sympathetic anarchists pulled up a horse cart, and exploded it here. It was the first terrorist attack on Wall Street. And they said that the explosion was so intense that the head of the horse, let's go over here, flew all the way up to Trinity Church up there at the top of the street. The head of the horse flew all the way up there to Trinity Church, and people were laying in the middle of Wall Street injured from the explosion. Well, J.P. Morgan himself was long dead, but his family decided to leave the holes here, they said, as a symbol of their fruitless attack on the destruction of the House of Morgan and great American capitalism. So the holes remain in the side of the building. Another thing we notice about the building is that the building itself doesn't have anything on it that identifies it as being the Morgan Bank building. And for those of you who've been there, this is the same J.P. Morgan if you visited the J.P. Morgan Home and Museum on the East 32nd Street. So that is the same J.P. Morgan. But there's no name anywhere on the building that identifies it as being built by or belonging to Morgan. And you know, everybody thinks that Morgan is having such a huge ego. Why would he not name his own building for him? You can see some of the restoration that's going on. The building is really in disrepair. And that is because J.P. Morgan had such a huge ego. He said that everyone would always know that this was the House of Morgan and that it needed no name on it. So still today, keeping with those original wishes, there's no name on the House of Morgan. And right across the House of Morgan, of course, is the New York Stock Exchange, which we'll get to in a moment. But we have to talk about Federal Hall National Memorial, because this is the oldest building on Wall Street. Like the Merchants Exchange, built around 1841, and it replaced the old Customs House, the old Federal Hall, and the old City Hall that was here. The Statue of Washington was added in 1889 to commemorate the 100-year anniversary of his inauguration. And you might know that we were out last week commemorating that inauguration. I was out as Mrs. Q with some reenactor friends of mine, and you can find those videos. I've published them all over if you want to take a look at those. So that's Federal Hall National Memorial. If you're ever down here, if they ever reopen, I encourage you to go inside. They have some nice exhibits about the first presidential inauguration and the history this building has played, and not only New York, but in American history. Oh, thank you. Somebody looked up the bombing. It was 1920. Did the entry show you the photograph of all the people laying in the street? It was quite horrific. And of course, the New York Stock Exchange. Stock Exchange, like this Morgan Bank building, was built around 1905, 1907. And you can see we're going back to that Neo-Greek style, that classical style with the columns. And these are more ornate Corinthian columns, and you can see there's statuary on the top. And I want to try to get to a spot where you can see those statues without any glare. So let's walk over here a little bit on Wall Street. Can you see those statues better? There they are. Now, one day when I was doing a tour, I heard an incredible story about these statues. First of all, that's called a frieze, and it's called Integrity Protecting the Works of Man, which I thought was pretty hilarious, being on the top of the New York Stock Exchange. But what can you say? So the woman in the middle is integrity, and on the right side is farming, and on the left side is industry. But I had a gentleman on my tour who does exterior building restoration, and he told me that those are not statues, that is actually a cast of the statues that's painted to look like stone. And he even showed me a picture of himself in a cherry picker painting one of the statues, fixing where the paint had chipped off of the statue. I tried to find out, looking through all kinds of resources, where those original statues are, and I could not find out. So those are not statues up there. That is an iron cast of the statues, painted to look like stone, which I thought was really fascinating. So we have here the New York Stock Exchange. Now, they've been here since 1905, but the Stock Exchange has been around since 1791 with the signing of the Buttonwood Agreement, which established an annual membership exchange. So we still have to find that building, right, that takes us to 300 years of building from at least 2019. And in order to do that, we have to go up here to another one of the oldest buildings we're going to see, Trinity Church. And now you can see in front of us Trinity Church coming up here. And this is the old Bankers Trust building here on the right. Again, all banking buildings. Oh, and since we're looking at architecture, I'll show you another one of my least favorite buildings in Lower Manhattan. You move up here a little bit and enlarge this. And it's this thing that looks like a Lego cat. So I call this building the Lego Cat Building, and it would actually satisfy our 300 years of architectural history if it was on Wall Street or South. As it is, this is up by City Hall Park, and I think this is pretty much an atrocity, and I just don't know about that. So you can let me know what you think of the Lego Cat as well. And we're going to head back up to Trinity Church and look at something quite beautiful. I don't have anything against modernist architecture, and I actually do very much enjoy Frank Gehry's work as well as some of the other new buildings in New York, but whoa, some of them, I don't know. And here's the side of the New York Stock Exchange, and we're walking up Wall Street to Broadway, and right here you see One Wall Street condominium residences. One Wall Street was originally the Irving Trust building. It was built in 1931. And it is another beautiful Art Deco building. And they've been working on this restoration of this building for so many years, I've lost count. My daughter just said, it looks like a Minecraft. It does look like a Minecraft. And I wish all this scaffolding wasn't here, because I wanted to show you something the architects of One Wall Street did, which was quite beautiful. And it was in honor of, or a tribute to, Trinity Church. Maybe we can see some of it as we come over here. We could see a little bit of it. So when we get to Trinity Church, you can see the Trinity Church windows, which look pretty much what you would expect the Gothic form to look like, right? You see there the entrance to Trinity Church and a window. Well, when they built One Broadway, the architects were concerned because New Yorkers were getting really tired of the modern architecture. So what they tried to do was find a way to have it blend in with Trinity Church. So you can see the entryways, although they're modern and Art Deco, they echo the shape of the windows and the entrance to Trinity Church, out of respect for Trinity Church, which at that time was the most revered building in this area. And let's look at a couple of the windows here. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see them here as well. So the architects, although they wanted to build something that in 1931 was modern, they still wanted to, keep the respect of the people of New York and honor Trinity Church in some way. So they kept on the ground level the design of the windows of Trinity Church. And here we are. So now we're up at Trinity Church. And Trinity Church, as you might know, was built in 1846. And it is an example of Gothic Revivalist style. Now, Gothic Revivalist is kind of a pretty version of Gothic. If we were to go to the Woolworth Building, you would, hi Janice, if you were to go to the Woolworth Building, you would see true Gothic. And we'll take a look at that on another tour because it's kind of far from where we are. You'd see an archway entrance with those really ugly gnomes all around the archway. Well, Gothic Revivalist is more a beautified idea of Gothic, sort of like, sort of like the idea of Camelot. This beautiful or beautification or romanticism of the medieval period. And this is, of course, all brownstone. The architect, it was Richard Updike, one of the most revered architects of Gothic Revivalist style. And the church is really magnificent. So let's cross the street and get a closer look at it. This is the third Trinity Church built on this site, built in 1846. The first built in 1697. Burned in 1776, then the second built sometime around the early 1790s, and that eventually collapsed in a snowstorm. One of the most noted things about Trinity Church is these beautiful doors, these bronze doors. I have trouble getting my camera to focus on them. These beautiful bronze doors, which were a gift of the Astor family. And I'll post some pictures of these later so you can see them. I'll post them on Facebook and Patreon so you can see them. And they illustrate Bible verses. Except for the doors, when you're facing the church on the left side or the south side of the church, where Alexander Hamilton is buried, the doors on this side illustrate Washington arriving at St. Paul's Chapel for his first ever inauguration. So a little bit different. And you can see a bit of the graveyard back there in the distance. The northern side of the Trinity Church graveyard is the oldest graveyard down here. It dates to the 1680s. And you can see they're still doing some work here. They've been doing a $100 million restoration of Trinity Church over the last couple of years. And it looks like they're just about finished and hopefully will be reopening when New York reopens. I hope in a couple of weeks. And here's a side look at Trinity Church. Let me see if I can show this to you a little bit better. There you go. So beautiful Gothic Revivalist cathedral right down here in the middle of the financial district. Very nice. You see they're still doing work. Here's some graves. But now that building I wanted to tell you about that gives us our 300 years is the one directly behind Trinity Church. And I don't know how well we're going to be able to see it. You can see it back there. There it is, rising up behind Trinity Church. And that was just finished in 2019. And it was built by Trinity Church. And that is their office building. And let me see if you can see a little bit of it. It really is, for a modern structure, quite beautiful. And I don't know what material it's made out of, but it does echo the color and the design of Trinity Church. And it is quite beautiful. So that's our most modern building, built by the people who own one of the oldest buildings. Remember, Trinity Church does own St. Paul's Chapel, which is the second oldest building down here, next to Fraunces Tavern. And let's see, what else can we see? All across the street we have some eagles, and we have all sorts of beautiful, beautiful stuff. And the steeple of Trinity Church up there. Whoa, there it is. So I hope you guys enjoyed our walk today. It was a little less planned than my tours usually are, but I had a good time doing it. I hope you had a great time watching. And this Friday, I hope you'll join me, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, as Mrs. Q, where Mrs. Q will be talking about the Sons of Liberty and that horrible lie and rumor that the Sons of Liberty started in Boston. As everyone knows, the Sons of Liberty originated in the city of New York. And Mrs. Q will not only explain that to you, but she will prove it to you on Friday night because, you know, of course, everything is New York. Look at these beautiful azaleas. Let's end with a picture of these beautiful azaleas in the graveyard. So thank you all for joining me. and I hope to see you all again soon. And remember, check out my Patreon page, Karen Q NYC, later this evening for some of those landmark documents of a few of the buildings we passed.